INGSA-Asia Spotlight Interview Series. The mission of the International Network Government Science Advice, INGSA, is to provide a forum for policymakers, practitioners, national academies, and academics to share experiences, build capacity, and develop theoretical and practical approaches to the use of scientific evidence in informing policy at all levels of government. And INGSA-Asia was established to foster this science advice capacity in the Asian region. And we do this by raising awareness, support training, encourage operational research on advisory principles, processes, and practices. Besides building the regional and inter-regional networks of science advice practitioners, INGSA-Asia also acts as a support mechanism for policymakers within the region and encourages outreach to help increase the demand for science advice by policymakers, as well as the supply, the ability of academics to act as effective knowledge brokers. By enabling greater information access and dissemination and the sharing of experience, we hope that we'll be able to advance this evidence-informed policy making at subnational, national, and transnational levels. And this is why we bring you the INGSA-Asia Spotlight Interview Series that really provides us an opportunity to spotlight individuals in the region who have a rich experience being in that science policy advice nexus. And through this shared experience, we hope that our listeners, i.e. you, will be able to harness that experience and apply that in your own future experiences. And today, I am so grateful that we have Professor Hyun-Chin Lim, who is the Professor Emeritus of Sociology and Director of Civil Society Programs Asia Center at the Seoul National University. Professor Lim is also an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, Republic of Korea. He currently serves as the president of the East Asian Sociological Association and is also the member of the Presidential Commission on Social Integration. He received his BA and MA in Sociology from Seoul National University and is also a PhD holder in Sociology from Harvard University. He was previously the Dean of Faculty of Liberal Education, as well as the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and the founding director of the Asia Center at Seoul National University. And besides his amazing academic leadership, he's also authored really important pieces of knowledge through the books such as Mobile Asia, Global Capitalism and Culture in East Asia, Capitalism and Capitalisms in Asia, and Asia on the Rise, Civilizational Turn. All these books have become really important references for how better we can understand society's operations, as well as how we can maybe use that to improve how society can function better, as well as how politics and society come together. So without further ado, let's give a huge welcome to Professor Lim Hyun-Chin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And so we will start now by basically going into our series of questions. So, Professor Lim, you have been a great advocate of, the idea that sociologists have a huge role to play as an interface between government and civil society in South Korea and also around the world. Could you perhaps share with us why you think a strong civil society is extremely important for a thriving society? And what role does it play in facilitating and mobilizing progress?
Okay, there is a saying that capitalism is possible without civil society. but democracy is impossible without civil society. Take an example of Korea. Korea has achieved both economic development and democracy for the last several decades. Okay, I think growing civil society has played an important role in achieving those industrialization and democratization. Then how can he conceive civil society? I think civil society is composed of the movement organizations, okay, that make individual citizens into active citizens. So a network of social movement organizations such as NGOs, NPOs, voluntary organization, and people's organization, lots of them are existing, and they are intermediating conflicting interest among citizens. And secondly, I think the public sphere is integral part to civil society that provides social dialogue necessary for the shared values and interests among citizens. So it is essential for shaping public opinion that practices increasing state accountability. To activate civil society, we need to strengthen interest politics among citizens. Unless social movement organizations do not aggregate various interests among diverse social classes and groups, civil society is not capable of channeling them into the state in formulating public policy. So in this context that I'd like to emphasize the role of the discourse in the public sphere for institutionalizing civil society. And no doubt, a great use of ICT-mediated communication has been instrumental in energizing public sphere in Korea. And also, social movement organization can rely on the social media in representing different opinions among citizens through public discourse on the basis of social trust. Okay.
No, great. I'm so glad that you brought up this whole idea of how social media is also transforming how our societies are actually functioning, and perhaps has also empowered this civil society movements. But there's also that perception that actually the same media that allows for this democratization of information has perhaps made misinformation, disinformation more pervasive, and perhaps to a certain extent also encourage greater anti-establishment tendencies. So I guess the question is social movement and activism really compatible with that of politics and political interests? And really, where is the gap and how can we bridge that? And could an individual who is a real activist become a politician without compromising on that independent and perhaps perceived anti-establishment principles?
A very good question. And I think there are some misunderstandings about the relationship between social movements and activism. Social movement could be progressive or conservative. That is, social movement organizations have could have different ideological and political orientation. Take an example: conservatism, liberalism, progressivism, anarchism, and so on. We usually call leaders of movement organization as activists, right? They try to change society against establishment or maintain society for vested interests. So I think social movement and activism are very much compatible with politics. It would not be easy to bridge the gap between social movement and politics. I mean, analytically speaking, social movement belong to civil society and politics to political society. Okay. What is meant by political society is composed of the political parties and parliament. Okay. So social movement organization want to aggregate and represent the various interests of citizens, while politics tries to make policies for the state. I would say that they are supposed to compete each other to organize the different interests and their different roles. On the one hand, politics can implement policies for either certain class or group or general public as a whole. On the other hand, activists can make progressive, liberal, policies. So in the case of the anti-establishment orientation, politicians with activist background can push radical reform measures, okay, in order to decrease the privileged interest of elites. And in the case of the establishment orientation, politicians from movement organization can maintain existing order to protect the best interest of the elites. I'd like to take an example of Korea. Politicians have tried to recruit people from movement organizations to extend their, legitimacy from the civil society. Then I would say that the progressive, liberal political parties have favored anti-establishment activists, while conservative political parties have favored establishment-oriented activists. So leaders of movement organizations want to participate in politics either to radically change society or to strongly maintain it, okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks for really reminding us again, it is about what is the mission, right? And I think very often we think that even science, cannot be politicized, but we can't run away from the fact that science only becomes relevant if it's politicized. But the question is, how do we avoid partisanship and really focusing on that evidence-informed policy making? And I think this is where there is an appreciation, at least in this last decade, and I think the International Network for Government Science Advice, INGSA, really tries to make an extra effort to make us realize that although many governments across Asia in the last decade have been focusing on investments on the physical, natural sciences, the science, technology, innovation, because it's associated with great economic progress. The reality is that there is a perception that social sciences, such as sociology, is underrepresented in the discussion of science policy. So Professor Lim, what are some of the repercussions to science advice if there is a lack of consideration for human behaviors, psychology, relationships, institutions, and culture, when science alone in its traditional form, if it does not take into account the interdisciplinary nature of science, no longer speaks for itself?
Okay, compared with the economics, political science or public administration, I think sociology is underrepresented. But sociology has advantages in that it has the rich tradition of historical and comparative perspective. In particular, its holistic approach to social phenomena can give us more integrated view of diverse human behaviors and social relations. So it will be very much usable, I think. Taking an example of the global impacts of the COVID, pandemic crisis, sociology can offer knowledge and insight by making linkage between micro aspects of human behaviors and macro aspects of social relations. We are living in difficult times. It has been already more than 2.5 years. COVID pandemic is unprecedented in history, still unfinished and uncertain in future. Because of the frequent lockdowns, our lives are not based on face-to-face meeting. virtual relations replace real relations. Human beings are social, animals. But in the process of the non-face-to-face meeting, we feel a strong sense of isolation. I think sociology can provide solutions to this kind of isolated human behaviors in a way that small group meetings are frequently recommended. In science policy, I think we need to provide more integrated knowledge to general public. I'm tempting to say that the sociology would be useful and indispensable in providing rich and varied evidences, comparative and historical perspective, and methods, knowledge and data, give us depth and breadth in diverse human, in understanding diverse human behaviors and social relations across local, country, region, and global dimensions. However, I think science advice is a very difficult job, since fact findings are okay, but value judgments are not. There is still a gap in trust between scientists and civil society in dealing with policies. Science is a public good, as INGSA, emphasized, right? In the science policy society interface, the practice of science must be inclusive, equitable, and impartial as much as possible. However, there is anti-policy or anti-science atmosphere in society, since general public do not trust government or even scientists. They think policies could be manipulated, distorted for the benefits of elites, certain groups or classes. And science also, they think partial and not objective for the government use. So we should bear in mind that we try to go beyond the perspective of science is a very, advice is very difficult job, since fact finding is okay. But when it comes to value judgment, it's very difficult. There is still a gap in trust between scientists and civil society in dealing with policies. Science is public goods, as INGSA have always emphasized. In the science policy society interface, the practice of science must be inclusive, equitable, and impartial as much as possible. However, there is anti-policy or anti-science atmosphere in society, since general public do not trust government or scientists. They would think policies could be manipulated, distorted for the benefits of certain elite groups or classes. And science could be also partial and not objective for the government use, not for the citizens. So we should bear in mind that we try to be more public-oriented, to go beyond the perspective elites, groups, certain groups, elites, and class. Critical mind and problem relevance and feasible alternatives are very much important. I'd like to emphasize. Okay, that's it. Okay,
Great. No, I think that's really important to emphasize. Going back again to why we do what we do. And reminding that though science is for public good, science is not the only determinant of public good. There's all these other factors that play. And thank you so much for giving us that added insight. South Korea, of course, in this region, when we see the progress that South Korea has made over the last decades, it's really amazingly impressive. And we are aware that even though countries in Asia share certain historical similarities, the reality is that there is a great divergence in our own socio-cultural histories. Apart from, I think, a universal love for K-pop, BTS, and Blackpink, what do you think are some of the parallels that you observe between South Korea and other Asian countries when it comes to science and social movements?
You know something, last year, UNCTAD, first time in its history, they changed, Korea's status in the international stratification from developing country to developed country. It's the first time in their history. Okay, so Korea, has been touted as having caught two birds. That is, one is industrialization, the other is democratization. So Korea's soft power has grown a lot, as you talked about K culture or K contents, K-wave or something like that.
K-pop.
Okay. Yeah, K-pop. Right. I think Korea's development experience would have no small lessons for developing countries, especially for Southeast Asian countries. I'd like to talk about science, social movement organizations separately, okay, for the sake of convenience. I'd like to emphasize that Korea has tried to, build the science early in the 1960s. Korean government established KIST, Korea Institute for Science Technology, in early 1960s. Where lots of scholars with foreign education were invited, and they also established undergraduate and graduate colleges to educate and train young generation. Science, especially natural science and engineering, were emphasized. Undoubtedly, the education and training of future scientists has contributed to the rapid and drastic economic development in Korea. However, science was utilized for government, not for the general public at the time. So there emerged mistrust in science among people, since science was too much pro-government. However, in the later period of economic development, policy making was changed to serve more people's needs in addition to government needs. So people began to trust government policies. People's attitude towards science has changed from anti-science to trust in science. And let me allow to talk about the civil society. Okay, Korea used to have a weak civil society, but have a strong state. Okay, it is since the late 1980s, civil society has begun to grow on a full scale. So social movement organizations, started growing since then. So since then, the growing civil societies, social movement organization, began to challenge the state. The state is, however, state is still dominant actor in organizing economy and society from top down. Yet, this horizontal accountability on the basis of separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and the judiciary branches, and its vertical accountability of the people by public policy formation have improved a lot. So it is against the backdrop that Korea has succeeded in consolidating democracy even after completing transition to democracy a decade ago. So I already said that social movement organization, I think civil society has played a lot in reaching citizens, social consciousness, and to make a check and balance against the state role in organizing state and society. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we really got to learn how within really a relatively short period of time, a matter of decades, not just that social transformation, but you're also seeing that socioeconomic progress that has made South Korea an envy for many countries that are still trapped in that middle income group. So, we're coming to the end of our interview today, Professor Lim, and I think I want to use this last question that I have to really get, a bit of your own aspirations, right? Because, I think as many countries have transitioned to endemicity, and hopefully we have turned, over from that whole pandemic chapter of our lives, and really appreciating how the pandemic has really fundamentally altered our relationship with ourselves, amongst each other, the nature and the world. I suppose I want to know your thoughts on really how, as a sociologist, you have perceived these changes, and how do you think humanity can come out better and stronger?
Very excellent question, and very important one too. I think we are living in difficult times. COVID pandemic is unprecedented and unfinished uncertain, as I already talked about. Today's world, we are struggling hard to survive the COVID-19 pandemic era. Throughout history, nothing has threatened to wipe out more human beings than the infectious disease like COVID-19. The pandemic clearly shows how vulnerable human beings remain. About 100 years ago, during the last great pandemic, one of the most renowned social scientists, I think you know him very well, a German social scientist, Max Weber, unfortunately caused, Spanish flu, and he passed away, okay? So COVID-19 could be labeled, once in a century crisis. I would say that the new coronavirus pandemic was unforeseeable because we had decades of warning signals against the frequency of global epidemics. Since the early 20th century, the humankind has experienced more than 30 kinds of new viruses. Global epidemics such as SARS, African swine fever, Ebola, MERS, and COVID-19 have been rampant almost every 3 years. The outbreak of new viruses is closely related to climate change that has destroyed the habitats and biomes of animals and plants. According to World Health Organization, global pandemic is supposed to increase by 4.7% as the average temperature of the Earth rises by 1 degree centigrade. The rise of temperature and humidity due to global warming ruins the ecosystem, pulling down the boundary of habitats between humans and animals, and viruses from tropical rainforests are transmitted to people. As a sociologist, I have a lot of things to talk about. Billions of people, during the last 2.5 years, billions of people in the low or economic ladder have lost their jobs. Social disparity between the haves and have-nots have increased a lot. For the sake of pandemic preparedness, liberal democracy has constrained civil liberty, often exercising the state of emergency declarations. I would say that liberal democracy becomes illiberal or undemocratic in that political incumbents respect the liberal component of democracy, such as the rule of law, separation of powers, and freedom of press, but they neglect or ignore respecting the will of people against the principle of liberalism. Due to the high uncertainty about the future of neoliberal capitalism, the state returns unavoidably, market retreats temporarily, and civil society shrinks considerably. The state has purposefully introduced the disaster relief fund to support people and meddled in selective financial support to self-employed and small businesses. The market has temporarily suspended its function of production, distribution, and consumption due to the national, regional, and local lockdowns. Civil society has inevitably weakened since cumulative actions are rarely made to form sound social capital. Moreover, the pandemic has disrupted our way of thinking and living in that everyday life has changed from in-person to non-face-to-face contact. Citizens increasingly find themselves isolated and lonely during the last 2.5 years. The less is more logic of social distancing and stay-at-home policy have weakened a sense of social togetherness and people, solidarity. So I think progress requires working together, not just as nations, but also as an international community, as you always emphasize, okay? Regrettably, however, in the wake of national survival, almost all countries have closed their borders to ward off the contagion spurred on from the global crisis. There has been a growing sense of hatred and discrimination rather than tolerance, compassion in the process combating COVID-19. So we need to work together, first in Asia. Then we extend our cooperation, to other regions, other continents. Then we can work together for the world peace and coexistence. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I really love the last comment, right? It is really ironic that while the virus did not respect the boundaries, it seems that humans decided to further emphasize the boundaries that exist between us. And your call for action at a regional level to create that ability to have that global harmonized dialogue, because the reality, as you pointed out, the challenges of climate change, the challenges of planetary health is one that requires that global cooperation at a local, regional, and ultimately that global cooperation. Professor Lim Hyun-Chin, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expert opinion. I think hearing from a giant of sociology in this region, and really your commitment to really promote that effective scientific knowledge brokerage for scientific public good, science for public good, I think came out really, really clear today. And INGSA thanks you so much for your support and contribution, and certainly your sharing today.
Thank you very much. And my thanks go to you. Doing a labor, and it's an very, very nice, wonderful interview.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay,
thank you. And with that, we end today's interview. And for our dear viewers, if you have got any specific inquiries, please go onto our website. Just Google us at INGSA-Asia, and there are many resources, databases, as well as contact information. We look forward to engaging with as many of you, and look out for the next Spotlight interview.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much again. I appreciate.
Thank you.
Appreciate.